Hello, all, and welcome back to This Day in History. It is August 19th, 2024. As you know, it's not about the year, but it's about the date, the history of the date. And we got some pretty interesting stuff. Some birthdays include some pop culture heroes, I think anyway. Fashion designers, uh, politicians. I look like hell because I'm on my way to the gym, so I didn't whatever. As far as like history, we have crownings, we have um, major battles uh, being fought and won. We have the comeuppance of power, comeuppance, I should say, of power for some not so nice people, and revisiting another thing that we've talked about recently, and some coups. Yeah, so let's get into it, shall we? So, the very first birthday we have actually it's 1883. 1883, fashion designer Coco Chanel was born, and um, Coco Chanel was, for 60 years, she kind of dominated the fashion world there in Paris. So she was born on this day in 1883. In 1906, Philo Farnsworth, and after having read this, I got to remember, I think I remember hearing the name being kicked around. He's an American inventor, and his name is synonymous with television because what he did is he invented the all electric television system. In other words, the receiver, the television that you have on your wall or in your room or whatever, right? Um, it is because of the invention of Farnsworth that exists, and basically your television it's essentially it's a signal receiver, and that's what he worked on. He worked on an all electric television system that was that received the signal that was sent. 1921, we see the birth of Gene Roddenberry. Here's where I say the pop culture icon, pop culture hero, because Gene Roddenberry was not only was he a veteran in the Navy, he served in the Navy during World War II, so he was a World War II veteran for one. Second, he was an American actor, or excuse me, not actor, writer and producer. What did he write for? What did he produce? Star Trek, the original Star Trek. Little fun fact: the reason why the Starship Enterprise was called the Enterprise is because Roddenberry served on the Enterprise in World War II. So it was kind of an ode back to his old ship. You talk to any Navy veteran, they're going to have a lot of love and loyalty for the ship that they served on, my uncle included. He was on a nuclear submarine, the USS Tennessee, and we were fishing one time when I was down there visiting there at Kings Bay, Georgia, where he served at. He was no longer in the submarine service, but he was a Navy cop, or master at arms, I should say. We were fishing down there at the pier there, and it was Fleet Week, so the fleet was coming back from their maneuvers, and the USS Tennessee went right on by, and I noticed the number on it. I'm like, "Hey, isn't that?" And he's like, "Yep, that's my old boat," and he affectionately referred to it as his old boat. So Navy veterans love you know, they love the vessels that they served on, and Gene Roddenberry was no different. That's why he had named the Starship Enterprise after his beloved USS Enterprise. So he was born on this day. Fred Thompson, if you've ever watched like Law and Order, he was an actor on Law and Order. He was one of the bigwig prosecuting attorneys. But he was also a politician. He was a senator for Tennessee. Fortunately, he passed away in 2015, but he was a big guy. He also was in some movies. I believe he played Admiral Greer in The Hunt for Red October, if I recall right. Um, I know that he's been in some movies, but he's been in some TV, and he was a politician and passed away in 2015. Speaking of other politicians, 1946, we see this is the birth of U.S. President Bill Clinton. 1973, the Crown Princess Mette Marit of Norway was born. She was born on this day in 1973. And that does it for the birthdays. And we'll just go back into the history here. And it starts in 1274. 1274, Edward I is crowned King of England at Westminster. Edward I might sound familiar to you if you've ever, and we've talked about Edward in past episodes. But if you've seen Braveheart, the King of England, known as Longshanks, that was Edward I. That was the guy that tried to basically bring the Scots under his tyrannical rule. If he couldn't get them to, pacify and accept his rulership, then he was going to breed them out. He had, in the movie anyway, he decreed that all Scottish weddings had to be subject to British authority, and that the British nobles would have their night with the bride first, so that they could essentially breed the Scots out of existence. Which doesn't really work that way, but I mean, he was kind of the movie really portrayed him as like being truly horrifically evil, and he might have been. I don't know. I mean, Hollywood always takes dramatic license. Moving on to the year is 1458. Aeneas Silvio Piccolomini was elected Pope as Pius II. This was after the death of Calixtus III. So a little Pope history there. 1812. It's the War of 1812. The USS Constitution, which is it's a living museum. It's actually still considered the oldest commissioned vessel in the United States Navy, even though its role right now is that of basically a living museum. It was commanded by Captain Isaac Hull. They won a brilliant victory over the British frigate HMS Guerriere. 1847, Major General Winfield Scott. He's in command of the U.S. forces. They begin the Battle of Contreras, which that battle opened up the final campaign against the Mexican army during the Mexican-American War. We fast forward to 1934, where 90% of the voter turnout came out in favor of approving the referendum that would make Adolf Hitler the Führer und Reichskanzler, which is leader and chancellor. So a little backstory on that is that the Nazi Party kind of rose in prominence, and it became a very viable political party. And the chancellor at the time begrudgingly accepted Hitler as his vice chancellor, and they tried to rein in his power and all that. Well, while he was vice chancellor, Hitler, he was pushing a lot of laws and such, legally of course, that paved the way for the rise of his Nazi regime. So that chancellor dies, and basically it went to a vote of the people with this referendum. And basically, it's kind of like, and we'll talk about this one later, it's kind of like Lenin never wanted Stalin to succeed him, but Stalin was the strongest of all the Bolsheviks, and that's how he ended up being. He was a right-hand man to Lenin, but Lenin didn't trust him to run the country and didn't really want him to succeed him, but he did anyway. It's kind of the same here, and I forget the name of that chancellor who died in office, but he did not have high confidence in Hitler and did not want Hitler to succeed him. I don't know if he suspected that Hitler would do what he did. I don't know, but there was a lot of folks in the Weimar Republic that did not want Hitler to rise to power, and yet he did so legally by vote of the people. And so it was 90% of this voter turnout that was in favor of him being made leader and chancellor. And so that's how he did it. And once he got into power, then he started affecting laws that allowed him to change the political regime. It allowed him to legally dissolve the Weimar Republic and establish his own fascist system, with the Nazi Party being in power. He did it all legally. It's like people wonder how a madman like that could come to power. Well, that's how he did it. He used the law to his advantage. It's like, had they been smart, they would have made, drafted a law that said, convicted criminals couldn't run for office. Had they done that, because, Hitler had spent a couple years in prison for basically inciting riots and starting a coup and all this and that. And, he was in prison. That's where he wrote, or he orated, and he had someone else actually type up the manuscript for Mein Kampf. That was the book that he had authored. Mein Kampf in English is My Struggle, where he blames the Jews, he blames the French, he blames everybody for, Germany's woes, never minding the fact that, Germany started all the crap, and it's like, that's why they were punished so harshly at the conclusion of World War I. They started all that mess. And so, but yet, just like, the typical delusional megalomaniac, it's always somebody else's fault. So yeah, so this is the beginning. It's on this day that this is really the beginning of the rise of the fascist regime that is known as the Nazis. Hitler's Germany really got its start with this vote and this 90% voter approval of him ascending to this level of power. 1936, we kind of see some other stuff. The Soviet officials began the Great Purge of the old prominent Bolsheviks. So basically, I just hit on this. Stalin did the same thing. Stalin was a right-hand man of Lenin. Lenin was he was the old school Bolshevik. He was the leader of the nation. He ousted Tsar Nicholas II. He got away with the monarchy. He got rid of this monarchy that had been in rule for 300 years, and was trying to form a system where they likened themselves of being like of the people, by the people, and for the people, but they really weren't. They railed on, we're doing this for the people. This is the people's, this is the people's fight, blah, 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 blah. Well, they were bloodthirsty. They were Marxists. That's what led to their, the forming of communisms, because they bought into Karl Marx's theories on how to just, everything should be about, the state, and how whoever is at the top of the thing, whoever's at the head of the table, they are the state. So so basically all of Stalin's political rivals, everyone who was together, that came together, that built the Bolsheviks, that built them up to prominent power, that supported Lenin, that supported his things, so Stalin knocked them all off. again, like I said, Lenin didn't really want Stalin to succeed him, but because Stalin was an iron fist, he took out all his political powers, and it started on this day in 1936. The end result was the executions of old Bolsheviks like Lev Kamenev and others. All these prominent figures that built the Bolshevik Revolution, that were part of the Bolshevik Revolution and built up the Bolshevik system. The ideals that they created, the Duma. They created the political power base that that Lenin had established and Stalin had rolled with, and subsequently all the other communists that rolled with until 1991. We're going to get into that here pretty soon. But yeah, that happened on this day as well. It is on this day in 1945 that commando forces formed by Vo Nguyen Giap under Vietnamese national leader Ho Chi Minh, they entered Hanoi. So what's so significant about that is that Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, parts of Burma, I believe, that was all known as the French Indochina. They were colonies of France. So World War II had concluded, and the Vietnamese were like, it's time to get rid of our French colonies. We want our country back. We see that in July and August there's a lot of countries that are just gaining their independence, and basically they wanted to cast off their French masters, and they wanted to carve out their own niche in life. So I believe this is the beginning of what would be France's own Vietnam War. They had, France was involved in the 50s, while we were involved in Korea. They were involved in France, or France was involved in keeping their colony, but they ended up leaving in like 1955, 6, somewhere in there. And then the South Vietnamese asked the Americans to come in and help them out, and so it was rinse and repeat, and we all know how that happened. We talked about Francis Gary Powers yesterday, actually, and here recently. But it is on this day in 1960, and if you don't recall, Francis Gary Powers was the pilot of the U-2 spy plane that was shot down over Russia. He was captured. It is on this day in 1960 that he's sentenced to 10 years in a Soviet prison. And if you paid attention to what happened in yesterday's episode, then he was released 2 years later. He was released in 1962, but it was a part of a prisoner exchange. We released Soviet spy Soviet spy Rudolf Abel. They went to a bridge in East Germany, and they sat off, and then they released their prisoners, Abel over here, Powers over here, and then they crossed paths, and both went back to their respective sides, and they were repatriated. So, but it is this day is when he was actually sentenced. We fast forward to 1994. American theoretical physicist or physical chemist Linus Pauling, he would die at the age of 93. Now, he was the only person to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes, one in chemistry in 1954, and the other was for peace in 1962. 2004, search engine Google raises $1.66 billion in initial public offering. In other words, they went public. They became a publicly traded company. And the interesting thing about it, in an unusual move, what they did is the shares were sold in a public auction with the intention that it would put the average investor on an equal playing field with professional financial investors, with financial industry professionals. So it kind of, they tried to level the playing field there. And last one is our featured event. It's 1991. It's this day in 1991. There's an attempted coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the United States. The general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In other words, he was the top communist. He was the guy that Reagan was meeting with. He was the guy that Reagan was, had a relationship with in scaling back, the buildup of nuclear weapons. Reagan had implored Gorbachev to make the necessary moves to tear down the Berlin Wall. He was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1985 to 1991. He was the president of the Soviet Union from 1990 to 1991. He was briefly ousted in a political coup backed by communist hardliners. It didn't last very long. He did regain power, as I recall, only to so that he could transition that power from when the Union fell, and then they became the Republic of Russia with Boris Yeltsin as its first president. So he was on hand to transition that power on over, and that first coup, that attempted coup, had happened on this day in 1991. And that is it. That is all for this day in history. So thanks for joining this overcast day. I'm going to go head to the gym before I go to work. And have a blessed day. Take care. Be well. And we will be back again tomorrow for August 20th. All right. See ya.